hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now.
All right, so second guest up on HeartBeat, I've got Danny Hozack from the metropolis of Lloydminster. I'm not sure if you're on the Alberta or the Saskatchewan side. Matters not because you're still a prominent voice inside of your community and inside of the Alberta community. Danny, I've had an opportunity to meet you at a couple of different events, and sure do appreciate you, hosting a couple of these events, and inside of that, allowing me to crash on your couch a couple times. Your hospitality's always been, greatly appreciated, and even more so inside of that is just what you do inside of your community and working to promote stronger messages and get people more active and get people out. Now there is one sort of catch line that you use to attract people into these places, and I don't want to take it away from you. What's that tagline you use about your wine?
I always say we have some of the finest red wine that $9 can buy, and it's amazing how many people stop by to see just how good a $9 wine you can actually get.
And I'm sure that they don't just show up for the wine or the libations. It's usually some of the top minds in the events that I've been to. Danny, inside of the political circles, how long have you really been active at this?
I've actually, our neighbor got elected with Lougheed in 1971, and I helped him with that. I was a pretty young fellow at the time, but I've actually been involved, basically reasonably involved since then. And another line that, people are, credit to me, and I often say it when people tell me that they're not interested in politics. I always say, well, actually, my grandpa wasn't interested in war either, but he still went twice so we could have a better life. And we have had, like, we've had a pretty comfortable life, those who of our generation and a little bit younger. And so I we have as you met me through our freedom talk and our essentials of freedom conferences, and our little group is called the Economic Education Association. And I often tell people that we're a group of activist grandparents trying to leave the world better than we found it. And lots of folks say, well, you might as well just pray for the second coming. And I said, well, actually we do, but this gives us something to do while we wait. And so here we are, we're waiting for the second coming and trying to leave a better world for future generations.
And I think that's a good philosophy. And what I'm going to do is when I get this up and posted, I'll post some links that you can provide to me for where you are on Twitter, and if other groups want to kind of join in or other people want to listen to the messages that you have to put out, I'll make sure to share some links that you can provide for me so that others can kind of at least be informed as to what we're looking at inside of the province or inside of the political landscape. Now, from 1971 to current, politics has changed quite a bit, I would imagine.
Well, it certainly has, you know what I mean? And a lot of the people that are involved in politics sort of spend, the majority of their time just figuring out how to get elected. And quite frankly, lots of them don't spend very much time at all thinking about governing until they actually get elected. And that was one of the reasons that we, formed our Economic Education Association with the help of Kevin Avram, who was one of the original founders of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And, as you know, I was a Wild Rose candidate in 2012, I think it was, and we were winning on Friday and lost on Monday. And when we were doing our analysis of sort of what went wrong, we sort of came to the conclusion that people just really didn't understand what the message we were giving, how important it was to actually consider, a whole range of issues, including how the people were going to govern. And so at Kevin's, with Kevin's encouragement, we started our Economic Education Association. And, we've been working, whatever that is, 10 or 12 years now, trying to create a more informed electorate. And we're also, we've been trying to invite people. So often, I think if there's one thing that has really changed since, as I've watched this, it's the polarization of groups. And I've had, in the last couple of years, I've had more complaints about our conference saying, well, I'm not coming if you're inviting him. And someone else will say, well, I'm not coming if you're inviting her. And I've been saying, look, we're not inviting these people because they're our friends or because we necessarily agree with them. We're inviting them to come and speak, and so we can sit there in the room, get to know each other, get to know that even the people we don't disagree with, most of them still want to have a productive and safe province for their family and their children and their grandchildren to grow up in. So I said, what we're trying to do with our conferences is basically host a venue where we can respectfully listen to both sides of the discussion. And I always say we want to like sort of facilitate an intelligent, respectful debate about the issues facing us. And then maybe we can come to some common ground about how we can move forward on those issues. And I actually think we've done pretty good at that. And we've had some really, as you know, some really quite incredible speakers, but when you talk to them, they're looking for a place to come and speak where they'll be well respected and not just talk to their own little segment of the political spectrum. They want to come and reach out to the broad spectrum. And I don't often give Rachel Notley or Premier Notley credit, but we actually invited her to 4 conferences during, when she was Premier. She had never actually found time to come, but she always responded very graciously and thanked us for taking the time to invite us. And some of my friends said, well, what are you going to do if she does come? And I said, if she does come, we'll listen to her. We'll get to know her. Maybe there is something we can agree on. I might be surprised if there is, but nevertheless, we were quite open to invite her, and we were very grateful for how gracious she was in declining. So, we've reached out to, we reach out to a lot of people in these conferences. And like I say, some people are offended by who we invite, and we say, be offended if you want, but that's why the country has the problems it has, is because you'll only go to the meeting to listen to the people you already agree with. And so anyway, that's where we're at. We try to do that, and we think we've done quite nicely, and we certainly have had some of the country's best speakers come and present to us. And just while I'm on that note, if there was any good that came out of COVID-19, we actually learned how to do the virtual part of an event as well. So now we're having in person, but we have a virtual component to it. And
No, and that's excellent. And then, just to kind of go along with that, that's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, is to basically use the tools that I have at my disposal to provide everybody a platform. Because I find when we go into these, and you've mentioned some of the issues, whether it's mobility or whether it's I don't like that person or whatever it is. I find that the conversations are of the utmost importance. And, sometimes when we do go to these venues, or even, if they're online or whatnot, some of the town halls that I've been invited out to, I sit and listen about a subject that I have zero interest in. And the subjects that I am interested in talking about, we'll get to that next round. That's not what this is for. Well, how do we know, as what Canadians are actually concerned about, if nobody's asking Canadians? And I mean, right now we're going to be facing one of these big things that a lot of Canadians don't seem to be on board with, is the increase in the carbon tax. We've had 7 premiers that have stood up against it. We've got 70% of Canadians that are opposed to it. The Liberals continue to lie about what we're getting back versus what we're putting into it. And instead of having those conversations with actual Canadians on the cost of living, on the tent cities, on all of that, we hear about climate change, which I don't believe is anything that the existential threat that anybody's trying to portray it as. And I certainly don't believe that there's a lot of conversations that Canadians need to have about the Ukraine or about Gaza or about Haiti. When we have people living in our streets, when we have people losing their homes, when we've spent into generational debt, the conversation should be about how do we improve lives for Canadians. And I want to hear about, these stories from Canadians, and through groups like yours. I'm sure you're interested in the same. We want to get out. We want to have respectful dialogue, and we want to have these debates. Just because I don't agree with something doesn't mean that you have to. We don't have to be on the same side of everything. It doesn't have to be so polarized that we have to be 100% on the same page, right?
exactly. And one of the, and I mean, I think we all struggle this, but one of the sayings that I quite like is that the only thing worse than not asking is asking and then not listening. And so often, I mean, our government leaders, so we're doing a provincial tour. We want to hear what you think. Well, then when you tell them, you try to tell them what you think, so we're not talking about that today. Like we've already decided, or that's not on the agenda today. So I think that's something where, even in our own group, we say, okay, like let's try and open up the discussion, but let's let don't ask people to come and tell us what they think and then say no, we haven't got time to talk about it. I mean, obviously in the course of a 2-day meeting, you can't talk about every single issue, and that's why we try to have an agenda, and we try to steer the discussion towards whatever the in each section, what the speakers in that section have been talking about. But when you look at our political leaders, I mean, I think somehow we have to we have to make a better effort to make them listen. And I've got some thoughts on how we're going to, try and make that happen too over the course of the next, months and weeks and years, or weeks and months and years, or whatever. And maybe we'll talk about that towards the end or whatever.
Yeah, and it's funny because what I've found is that I've kind of changed on the I guess it's on my opinions of politicians, and that's through the benefit of actually having met some of them now. So at a couple of the events that we've been at, we've been fortunate to have Shane Getson out, MLA from Lac Saint Anne. Absolutely love Shane. I think he's a down to earth guy. I think he's a great speaker. He's got a good message. And when you sit down to a conversation with him, he gives you 100% of his attention. Now, he can't change the world. He's only one MLA inside of one part. But when you watch him, even inside of legislature, I've heard him say time and time again, listen, if you're not listening to your constituents, they're going to come to us, and we're going to bring forward their messages. So whether you hear it from them or whether you hear it from us, they're still coming from the same places. So you have to do a better job at listening to your constituents instead of just representing this blindly with your party. You were elected in to as their representative. And it's one of his most powerful messages, I think, that he'd said is that you're not just here to represent the people that voted for you. You're also here to represent the people that didn't vote for you. So you have to take their voices into consideration. Now, throughout the pandemic, I've written several letters to MPs, MLAs, and have gotten either nothing back or have gotten a blanket email with a pat response where they completely ignore any of my concerns. And I found that rather frustrating. If you can get in front of one of these guys, you get to learn that, they're doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. What I've come to realize, and especially, through meeting Shane Getson and Eric Bouchard, is that they're people like you and me. I think having the platforms, like you said, that we've been introduced to through COVID, and having some prominent voices that can help elevate, some of the leaders that we have that can help deliver some of the messages and that can help start some of these conversations are so important.
Well, they are. And one of the threads that leads from everything you've just talked about is, like you sort of said, Shane, like they're all good people, and I'll give you that. Like they all are, and they all go there with the best of intentions. But and I think you said they're doing the best they can with the tools that they've got. You know what I mean? But one of the tools that we as voters don't have is recall. You know what I mean? And see, to me, the reason the private sector works and government, generally speaking, just gets bigger and bigger and flabbier is because we actually can't fire someone. You know what I mean? And so, and you use the car analogy, like, I mean, hiring somebody that you can't fire is like buying a car with no brakes. You're just going to go until it crashes. You know what I mean? And so some of them put it off for quite a few years before the crash comes. But on the other hand, no one in the private sector would hire someone that they can't fire. You know what I mean? But somehow we take for granted that, if you can fire them every 4 years, like, I mean, who would do that in their private life where you just said, oh yeah, Sheldon, if you show up for work on Monday, like I'll give you, the keys to the car and a company credit card, and your next job review will be in 4 years. Like, I mean, like it's almost a joke to think that anyone would do that in the private sector, and yet we do it in government all the time. So, and I think I mean, a lot of once people get elected, they're a little hesitant about recall. And Jason Kenney, promised recall. He promised recall in the last election, and he brought in, recall, which I would say was a shiny new car with no brakes. Because if you look at the mayor in Calgary, under Jason Kenney's recall, I think it's 40% of the electorate, which is, or the population, I'm not sure which, but
The population.
yeah, it's 560 some thousand signatures they need to recall her. But in the recall that Paul Himman from the Wild Rose Party has presented, it's 50% plus one of the people who voted. So to use the Calgary example, which I think is ongoing as we speak, I think there was 330,000 people voted in the election, so they need 165,000 plus one to recall her. Well, 165,000 plus one is quite achievable. I mean, I actually hope they get to the 564, but that'll be a monumental task. But anyway, if we had effective recall, and see, one of the things that happens to these fellas, they go there with the best of intentions. And I mean, I like Shane too. I've seen him. I guess we've been at some of the same events together, where he's fun to be around. He's very knowledgeable. He works hard. I like what he's trying to do. But again, they get on the team, and what happens is, and Drew Barnes is a good example of this. If you start questioning what the team's doing, first thing you know, you're not on the team. And so I've heard that not just from Drew, but time and time again. We'll talk to, an MLA that we really like and say, well, I can't really say that, or I won't be on the committee. Well, the thing is, and I mean, and that's true. I know that's true. If they speak out, if they don't stay absolutely on the party line, they're not on the team anymore. But if you actually had effective recall, well, then, when I go to the leader and say, well, my constituents really want me to do this, and the leader says, well, if you do that, you won't be on the team, you won't be on any committees. I say, well, actually, that's not my number one concern, because if I don't do it, I'm not going to be here, because they're going to recall me. So like, I want something done about it, because I'm leaving either way, I guess. But I mean, if I leave, it'll be my constituents who fire me, not you. And so I've become I didn't used to believe in recall, but the older I get, I look and I think, yes, when you look at all the things we've tried to create effective government, the only thing we haven't tried is an effective recall. So I've sort of become a big proponent of that. And, I guess we'll see if we can talk anybody into doing it. One of the things that always comes up, and then I'll get off of this recall pitch, but like when Paul Himman first got elected, he said, we don't need any legislation for this. You can just have my word. And the Wild Rose Party in the last election actually had that. We called the Wild Rose Recall Pledge. And we just pledged that if 50% plus one of the people who voted signed a recall thing, we would step down and run in a by-election. So anyway, there's things we can do to there's like, selling cars with no brakes has gone out of style. You know what I mean? And so we need to get some brakes for this car. It's 50% of the economy. We need to fix the brakes.
Yeah, and I think and it's not just on just under the idea of recall. It's accountability to constituents. And in going through, because I've been to some of the recall Gondek gatherings in front of with some of the groups and stuff, gotten some signatures. It's everybody is under the impression that it is a large milestone to hit, but that doesn't stop them from swinging for it. And I think that's important, where they're okay with, if we fail on this, we want to send a powerful message, because we may not get Gondek. We are raising awareness. She will not be the mayor, in a second term, because we've raised the awareness that much. And we're going to get the next people on board if they come into mayor. Let them know that we're ready to go to a bat for our communities. And if it takes another run at however impossible the achievement is to have them recalled, then we're going to do exactly that. And I think that that's another place where people get their voices back.
Absolutely. And I mean, I hope the people in Calgary do get enough signatures. It's an absolutely monumental task to get that many. But anybody who knows somebody in Calgary, I would encourage them to try and help them, get there. But I would also encourage anyone who's signing that petition should resolve to never vote for anyone again who doesn't make a personal pledge at 50% plus one of the people who vote. And that way, then you don't have to, like, why should we have to go through all this work? They're all sitting there getting paid and all. I mean, we're all busy. We all have busy lives. And yet, we have to go out and we have to spend tens of thousands of hours trying to fire somebody that darn well deserves to be fired. If we had effective recall, I think they had 75,000 signatures in the first week. So, I mean, 165,000, they'd have it by now. You know what I mean? And so if we had effective recall, she'd be gone. And my friend says, he says, you don't have to hang everyone, you just have to hang someone, and everybody pays attention. And once you recall one person, and then the next time you say, oh, I'm not so, you phone your MLA and say, I'm not so sure that's a good idea. Oh, there's nothing I can do about it. You say, well, there's something we can do about it. You'll be hearing about it next week. All of a sudden, they'd be thinking, maybe there is something. Maybe I should go to Cox and speak out against this before I'm facing a recall. So I wish the people in Calgary well in recalling her. And like you say, even if they don't make it, there's certainly a lot of people who are becoming more aware of how we're being treated by our elected people and how totally unaccountable some of them are. And I mean, if you're actually, and like a lot of my friends say, well, Danny, why do you want recall? And I mean, one thing I've proven pretty conclusively is I can't get elected anyway. But if I did, and I mean, 50% of the people who voted for me wanted me out, I would be happy to, like, whatever you do. Like, and again, I mean, my friends say, well, if you get in there and you really bring in a conservative agenda, they will want to recall you. I said, that's fine. But I mean, if you don't believe that 50% of the people in your province or your constituency actually are supporting what you're doing,
basically divorced herself from the party. And now she works with the Conservatives. And she said, like, you guys are a zany bunch. She goes, you guys, if you don't agree on something, you'll open your own parties. But you brought up an important point about having these alternate parties, and that I believe you'd said that, if somebody's out there, instead of running a candidate that's not going to get a support from the party, we'll have our own party, and we'll show that there is an alternate inside of our communities that people will listen to. So like with the Wild Rose, or we've had a few of these other parties. I'd come to gain an appreciation for that exact same thing. People either running as an independent, because right now everything is so polarized. People are afraid to cross the floor. They're afraid to not be on committees. Whereas it's almost gotten to the point where you don't even want to see a 2-party or a 3-party system anymore. You want to see all independents, because you want people responsible to their constituents instead of responsible to their party line.
well, yeah, I'm not really big on independence because, like, I hear what you're saying, but if you're going to get something done if you're going to get something done in Edmonton, like you're going to need 50% of the people who get elected to agree with you. You know what I mean? And so just electing 50 people that all have their own 50 different ideas, like there's some problems with that. But having said that, I mean, if you actually have open votes and recall, there's a lot of things that get done by the majority just because the whip says this is the way we're voting. But I mean, if there was actual recall and some of those people were like subject to being recalled, well then it would be a lot harder to whip them. And the other thing, I looked at it the other day, and I think there was 10 or 12 ridings in Calgary where the NDP won by less than 1,000 votes. And so just at the moment, I've had about half a dozen calls in the last week of good loyal conservatives who are going around taking up a petition to support Danielle Smith's position on this whole transgender issue. You know what I mean? And one thing and another. But on the other hand, that's all fine and dandy. But I mean, they're taking up the petition in the rural area where they got elected. So I mean, of course, we support their the way they're dealing with the school system. We think that the parents should be more involved. When our kids were going to school, we had to sign to let them play basketball. And now the school system thinks they should be able to change their gender without telling the parents. Like, how insane is that? But in any event, instead of going around the province taking up a petition to show that we support Danielle Smith, why not focus on 8 or 10 ridings in Calgary and recall the 10 or 12 NDP people who won, and cost them their job, and say, oh, if you want to keep talking about the parents shouldn't have a right to know what their kids are doing in school, fine, but we're going to recall you. We'll elect and I mean, I didn't really look to see if there was a split between Wild Rose and the UCP and those things, but if I got into organizing to recall 4 or 5 of them, I would certainly make a deal with the UCP if I was speaking for the Wild Rose, which I'm not at the moment. But and say, look, we'll recall 5 of them, and you can run in 3 of them, we'll run in 2 of them, but we'll elect somebody who is more conservative than they are, and we will teach them a lesson. So I think there's a lot of things we could do if we had recall, and some of this idiocy that we see in government, it wouldn't be happening if you could recall people. It really wouldn't.
Yeah, no, that actually sounds like the most reasonable solution. So again, yeah, just another reason why the Recall Gondek effort is that much more important. Inside of, when you're not working with the entire city for having to recall, when you're just looking in smaller areas, these things seem a little bit more achievable. Now, I know that there are 2 city councilors that they've tried to recall. One of them was mine, Sean Chu. And I'm one of the areas inside of the city that flipped to orange, and I think it was by less than 100 votes. So Prasad Panda had lost
Yep.
his support inside of our community, and it was only by 100 votes. Like it was really really tight on that. And I belong to the Facebook book group for our community for Dalhousie, Calgary, and then I'm on Next Door, the app, and it's they're sometimes tough conversations to have, but I think that that's exactly why they need to be had. When we look at what's happening with there's one of the gyms that's stock prices are dropping because they're not protecting women's change rooms from men in there. And when we
Yep.
look in Calgary in 2022, I think the trans men or trans women were allowed to go into women's change rooms inside of all city facilities. When I think about that, I think if I took one of my granddaughters swimming, I wouldn't be allowed to go into the women's change room and get her ready to go out into the pool. I'd have to take her into the men's and, kind of keep her protected inside of the men's change room. Yet at the same time, like I'm there for my granddaughter or granddaughters. Who's watching the people that are allowed, or why are there some men allowed because they're wearing makeup into these places with children, and people aren't feeling protected by that. And I know that that's a pretty big thing, but they went ahead and punched through with that, and there's a lot of people I think using a lot less of the city facilities and even the private ones if they don't feel safe in using them.
Well, see, there's 2 things there. Yeah, I forget, it's some planet. I just saw that on Twitter this morning. They lost $230 million in market value in a week. When they started. I mean, like you look and you think, who's running these companies? Like, I mean, like you say, I mean, even if your wife took your granddaughter into the change room, do you think they want some trans men in there watching them change? Absolutely not. This is the height of insanity. You know what I mean? And but again, uh, I always say, like, conservatives were actually consumers with cash. And I mean, I think we need to be, and I'm not necessarily a big boycott person, but some of these people that are just defying the fundamental decency that we've all grown up with, they need to be held to account, and they might as well be out of business. It's the old, you don't have to hang everybody, you just have to hang someone. You take that Planet Outfit and put them out of business, and then the whoever buys their assets for 10 cents on the dollar, it'll be saying women only. There'll be, take our word for it, there'll be no men in your change room, which there shouldn't be. And so this is where we're at. But I think the good news about this is when you look at the whole Dylan Mulvaney thing and the Bud Light thing and some of this stuff, all of a sudden we're starting to realize pushing back isn't that bad of an idea. You know what I mean? Of course, we all want to do it peacefully, but there's things that we can do to where we just say, okay, we're not putting up with this anymore.
Yeah, and on the cancel culture side of things, I think it really, and this goes back a few years. It goes back to Gillette, the
Yeah.
company Gillette, and then Anheuser-Busch with Bud Light. There was something about Doritos or Cheetos, one of the other chip brands, and then now it's Planet Fitness, I think it's called.
Planet Fitness is, yes, yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
where I think a lot of these places are starting to, decide that they're going to keep inside of their own lanes. How much of this are governments going to mandate? And that's the big scary part of it. Because if governments mandate these open change rooms or these DEI policies, it's an attack on these people's businesses, on their livelihoods. And, if it goes against their company policies, their company values, their company statements, if it's an attack on their profits, their revenues, the reason that they're in business, if it goes against their shareholders and governments are mandating these policies, we're going to be seeing a lot fewer businesses that, business interest in Canada from anybody that would want to invest. And we've had just an enormous amount of companies fleeing Canada already, an enormous amount of investment fleeing Canada just because of Trudeau. It's been like this year has been record breaking. So yeah, I think with on the woke side of things and the DEI, I mean, these policies have done nothing for Canadians. Whereas we've seen Canada grow under traditional family values, and all of these new ideas seem to go against traditional family values. When I was growing up, we had it was an athletic challenge, and you got a participation badge.
Participation, wasn't it? Yeah.
Participation, yeah, that was it. And I was a short fat kid, so I was never really that good in it. But man, when I got from participating to up to a bronze and then a silver, and then I got my first gold, that was something that I'd strived for. If all we're doing is promoting people based on their immutable qualities or the color of their hair or the size of or the number of piercings they have in their face, and then we continue to extend that into the workplace, we're not creating a functional society. We're not supporting true values of achievement, and it's going to continue to weaken us. And I think we're seeing a lot of that already.
Well, I think we are, and I mean, but I think the pendulum's starting to swing back. If I'm not mistaken, like even some of these investment groups like BlackRock, some of their shareholders started coming to them and saying, "We didn't give you, we didn't give you our money to invest so you could change the world. We gave you our money to invest so you could maximize our return on our investment. So let somebody else change the world. We want you to invest our money wisely so we make a good return so we can have a comfortable living. If you want to get into changing the world, go join the Democrats, you know what I mean, and see how that works out for you. You know what I mean? So I actually do think it's swinging back a little bit, and it's not an easy thing, but I mean, this whole climate thing, with the possible exception of the COVID hoax, is probably the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on society, including the net zero. And as you know, Jordan Peterson, who probably, he said carbon net zero is a ridiculous solution to an imaginary problem. And there's more and more people starting to realize that. And I guess if there's any good news coming out of all of this, is Justin has sort of put up our costs of everything to where people are saying, what the heck is going on here? Like, I mean, I'm not making enough money to make ends meet. And you touched on this when we were visiting the other day, how many people are talking to you about how difficult a time they're having to make ends meet. And the reason they're having a difficult time making ends meet, it's the carbon tax. And I see some of the do-gooders on the left saying, oh, well, the carbon tax isn't on the food, it isn't on this. Like, the carbon tax is on the fuel, and there's very few people that get any food that hasn't been hauled by a truck, hasn't been raised by hasn't been produced by a tractor that uses fuel. And all that stuff is taxed. I mean, maybe the agricultural, maybe we're exempt on the carbon tax on some of the agricultural fuel, but you can be sure some of the parts that get delivered to the warehouse and one thing and another, the carbon tax is on all of that stuff. And so to me, they're taking us down the road to ruin. And like you said earlier, like 7 out of the 10 premiers have said They want something done about the carbon tax. One of the things that I suggested, I suggested this to our past finance minister. His name, he used to be the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's. Can you think of his name? He was the finance minister under Kenny. He ran for the leadership. I'll think of it in a second. But anyway, I asked him, when he was the finance minister, I said, "Do you have any idea how many dollars of federal income tax payroll deductions the Alberta government sends to Ottawa each month?" Travis Taves was the finance minister, and he said, "No, I actually don't know." But anyway, I did sort of a rough calculation. There's somewhere around 100 or 200,000 people who work for the provincial government in education, the universities, healthcare, one thing and another, the bureaucracy. And if you take 200,000 and they're all if they all send say $20,000 a year in income tax, it's probably way more than that. It'd be $4, $5, $6, $8 billion of federal income tax payroll deductions that the Alberta government forwards to Ottawa. And I said, just stop forwarding that. Don't talk about not collecting the carbon tax. Just stop forwarding your payroll deductions until we get this sorted out. And if all 7 of those premiers said, okay, like Quebec already collects their own tax, but if the 7 premiers that from their provincial government, they just said, we're not going to forward our federal payroll income tax deductions to you until we get this sorted out. They'd have a national meeting to discuss it sometime next week. You can count on me. And if they want somebody to chair the meeting, I'd be happy to volunteer. You know what I mean? So, but you see what I mean? Like some of this stuff, and it's the same thing. It went back to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, like when the protesters were, they were getting on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It ended up, they ended up selling it to the federal government because they couldn't get the job done. But at the time, I said, like, Jason Kenney should call the premier of BC, and 70% of what gets unloaded in the ports in Vancouver ends up east of Alberta. It all goes by rail from Vancouver to east of Alberta. All he had to do was call the premier of BC and say, keep those people off that blessed pipeline. And the next time someone steps foot on the right of way, we're going to stop the trains, from crossing our province. So your ports will be full, and we're going to shut the gas off that is coming to you. And so, like, do me a favor, just be sure that no one steps on the pipeline, or the right of way. And if he'd had the guts to do that, they wouldn't have had the guts to call his bluff on it. And it all would have worked. As it was, we end up selling the whoever it was, Keystone XL, it wasn't Keystone XL, it was Trans Mountain, but they sold it to the federal government, and now it's cost what, 20, 30, 40, 50 billion instead of 5 billion to build. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's
So it
29,
wasn't for, yeah, it was
billion
from a
over
lack
budget,
of
I believe.
leadership. What's that? Sorry.
29 billion over budget, I believe, on that.
Yes, I know, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, 29 billion, and I think 6 extra years of,
Yes.
and they're still stuck on stalls on it. I mean, the federal government did that on purpose.
Yeah, I know.
They wanted to take something that could have been a boon for Alberta and turn it into something that'll never make money.
It's a boom. It could have been a boom for Alberta. Instead, it's a boondoggle for Canada. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. No, using some of these bargaining chips is, I think, a great idea. And Scott Moe just did the same thing. And I seen a tweet by him earlier today. So he'd removed the carbon tax from heating because it's a provincially owned energy source, right?
Yeah.
And where Canada is claiming 2.8% on inflation, he said we've dropped that down to 1.7. So I mean, that's a pretty sizable difference for what they're going to be appreciating inside of Saskatchewan. It's not a large population, but it will make a big impact. And he's basically done exactly what you're saying. No, we're not going to go ahead with your lunacy. We're not going to go ahead with these scams. This is the tool that we have to use, and we're using it.
Exactly. And I think we need more of that, where we have provincial autonomy and a whole lot of things, and it's so much easier to just say, there's nothing we can do. The federal government made it. We need to get leaders say, look, we're not doing it. It's not good for Alberta. We're not doing it. Period.
And it seems that Quebec has a bigger bargaining chip because they collect their own income taxes. They collect their own pension program. So If they want any money from Quebec, it seems like we're having to give more or be a lot more tolerant of some of the ideas coming out of there. I mean, not to mention they have their own provincial federal party, the Bloc, right? But it seems like they're a lot better at negotiating because I think they have more of these tools that they've already taken control of. So if we did the same, we had our own pension plan, if we had our own income tax structure inside of the province, we'd be able to make a lot of these decisions for ourselves. Now, with that being said, I mean, they have a much larger population than we do. Would it be, is it as practical for us to have our own pension plan, in your opinion, and do our own revenue collections? Or, is one thing better? Like, could we keep APP and just let them do revenue tax? What's your thoughts on that, Danny?
You know, I think we should do it all. You know what I mean? And I'm not really up to date on the numbers, but the last I saw, and I think it was Jack Mintz article, but I think Albertans send about $50 billion a year of taxes to Ottawa, all different kinds of taxes and levies and fees and one thing and another. And we get $10 billion back in transfers, and we get $20 billion of services provided for us by people who work in Ottawa and Hull. Well, if you just did everything for ourselves, that 20 billion, the 20 billion in services is probably 10 billion in cost and 10 billion in labor. So if you just did everything in Alberta, that 20 billion in services would be provided by people who lived in Alberta. $10 billion in labor. Tech Frontier, as you know, Tech Frontier spent, I think we've had 2 or 3 different pipelines who spent $1 billion trying to get regulatory approval. Tech Frontier had spent $1 billion, and if you remember, they withdrew just before the end of February, about 3 or 4 years ago. They withdrew their application because it looked like Trudeau was going to turn it down. And at the time, I gave, I think, some really good advice to Premier Kenney. I said, Premier Kenney should tell Justin Trudeau, if they turn down Tech Frontier, which was was an oil sand project. I'm sure you're familiar with it in the northern corner. I'm not sure if it was, I guess it was in the northern corner of Alberta. But anyway, I said, if they turn down Tech Frontier, Jason Kenney should tell Justin Trudeau that Alberta will vote on independence 30 days later or 60 days later. And if we achieve independence, the first thing we will do is approve Tech Frontier. Well, my guess is it would have taken, a few $100 million to run an independence referendum, but Tech Frontier had already spent $1 billion. They might have put a couple of $100 million into the referendum to try and get us to leave so they could build their blessed plant. But again, this goes back to my story about the pipeline. If Jason would have had the guts to tell him that, they wouldn't have had the guts to find out if he really would do it. So again, some of the problems we have in Alberta are not, they're not necessarily problems from the east. It's a failure of leadership in Alberta. So we should have just said, look, we're not doing that. And so to go back to the story, we send $50 billion to Ottawa. The Tech Frontier, if I'm not mistaken, was 3 or 4 or $5 billion over 10 years. If we provided all our own services, like we're spending 20 billion for the federal government to do it for us right now, 10 billion of it is cost, 10 billion of it is labor. If we hired that labor, it would be a $10 billion mega project in Alberta every year forever. So all those people that are working in Ontario, no disrespect to them, in Ottawa and Hull and one thing and another, I've met lots of them, they're all nice people, but they could be living in Vegreville and Red Deer and Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and Whiteminster and you name it. They'd be working here. Their husbands would be working here, their wives would be working here, their kids would be playing hockey, we'd be going to restaurants here. That would be a $10 billion mega project if we did it all ourselves. And I mean, when you do it one at a time, the RCMP, they talk about that. I think the last I saw, we spend, the RCMP costs about $400 million. If I'm not mistaken, the federal government puts in 160 million and we put in 250 million. Well, if we had to put in another 160 million, and then to go back to the 50 billion we send them, they give us 10 billion in transfers. $20 billion in services to us, and 20 billion we don't get back at all. So, I mean, you could do a lot with that 20 billion every year. Then if you built Tech Frontier, it'd be a 10 billion. Like if you had all that labor in Alberta, that's another 10 billion. That would be $30 billion a year we'd have to spend here, helping pay down our debt, helping to, build our roads. I hear Guilbeault doesn't want to build roads for us now. Like, I mean, spare me. Like, I mean, I think, the more you look at it, the more you just look and you think, I have a lot of really dear friends in the East, but I have a lot of really dear friends in America, and it doesn't bother me they're in a different country, and it wouldn't bother me if the people down East were in a different country. You know what I mean? And so I think that Alberta needs to sort of take the bull by the horns. I think we could create an island of freedom and prosperity, and that like the world has never seen. You know what I mean? So I'm for all of it.
So we can officially do this with all the same tools we already have in place. We don't have to go to be a sovereign province. We don't have to be completely independent of Canada. We could still do this as part of the country, part of the union, in the same way that Quebec is. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we could just start having our own pension plan. We could have our own police force, you know what I mean? And I said, like some of my best friends are police officers, and I said, I have no complaints about them. My complaint is the orders being given from Ottawa instead of from Edmonton, you know what I mean? And so, so again, I think we could have our own police force. We could collect our own pension. We could, all of this stuff. I mean, and all these people would be working in Alberta. Like the head office for the police, the new Alberta Police would be in Alberta instead of head office being in Quebec. I had a really good friend, or Ontario at least. I had a really good friend. He joined the RCMP at 18. At 53, I think he was an inspector. But anyway, he applied for a job in Ottawa, and they said, "Oh, sorry, you're not bilingual." And you think, okay, only in Canada, you know what I mean? Like, so, but
35
anyway,
years service, and you're
yeah,
ignored
35 years service, but no, you're not qualified to go to head office, you know what I mean? So, I think we could do, I think we could do it all within the country too. Like, I mean, we've got people that we do business with, where we just share back and forth. Is okay, this is what we did for you. This is what you did for us. This is who owes who what, and we could do that. We could easily do it with Canada, and on things to do with the national security, one thing or another. We could pay our share. We know we've got what have we got? 4 million people out of 40 million, 10%. So if whatever the armed forces are, we would pay our 10%. If Justin wanted to give money to some godforsaken place for DEI, we say, well, no, we're not paying our share of that. We don't believe in it. If somebody else in Canada wants to pay for it, go ahead, but we're not taking money from Alberta to pay for that. But if it's to sort of defend our Arctic, which I think we should be, Stephen Harper did a good job of sort of planting the flag up there. And I think I just see on Fox News they'd taken a tour up to the Americans had taken a tour up to the North Pole, and there's no question Russia's sort of looking, and China are looking fondly at our northern territories, and so we all need to be prepared to defend that. But we could pay our share of that. But when we're giving 20 billion, when we send 20 billion every year that we don't get back, we're paying way more than our share. It doesn't matter how they do the numbers, we're paying more than our share. And so to just say we'll pay our share, I think would be perfectly fair and perfectly doable.
And I think a big portion of that goes to, when the federal election does come around, when it comes to electing a prime minister. I've said it before the first vote gets counted in Winnipeg, it's already been decided.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't really feel like a democracy when you see that kind of thing go down. I mean, the elections are basically called before we even see the polling start from the Western provinces. And I think that that's lent itself to voter apathy. And I think that's one of the reasons that people have shut down. It's like, my voice doesn't matter. And so why should I bother taking the time? I think another portion of that is, and let's get into this $10 daycare thing, is that the cost of living has gone so high, is that, between, and what it's like, because I know how active you are with your grandchildren. You were out in Red Deer this last weekend, right?
Yeah.
For a couple tournaments. So I know that people are really busy with their lives. They're just trying to, if it's a second job or if it's trying to keep up with their kids, they don't have the time. And if nobody's listening to them anyways, what's the point in paying attention?
Well, you're right, and they don't have the time. And I mean, a lot of the people that sort of mock, they mock the Reform Party, and they've mocked, some of our Wild Rose meetings, and even some of the federal conservatives, and they say, oh, they're all a bunch of old gray-haired people. Well, quite frankly, lots of us are, but because the younger generation are busy like trying to raise their family and feed them and pay their bills, which get harder and harder to do all the time. So I look at the younger generation. I think as long as they're well enough informed to at least take time to vote, that some of us older people, we can carry the ball on some of this stuff. And I speak at quite a few meetings, as you know, and a lot of people say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to include the youth? And I always say, well, we'll tell them the truth. And what happens so often is an election comes along, and everybody globs on to say, oh, come door knocking with us, come and do this. And I'm going to pick on my federal conservative friends for a few minutes, because they're still supporting this the Paris Accord and climate change. And even Danielle, bless her heart, is still talking about carbon net zero, even though Justin wants to shut us down by 2030. They're still talking about getting to carbon net zero at 2050. So, but anyway, we get these young people involved and say, oh yeah, we're gonna save the world by sequestering carbon and all this stuff. And they get involved and they help somebody get elected, and then they get a little bit older and they get looking at it and they think, holy smokes, they weren't telling us the truth about the carbon. Actually, we need more CO2. Like, why are they against CO2? Well, they're against CO2 because they're trying to get elected in Toronto and maybe Edmonton. And they think, well, that lying old son of a gun, they're all just a bunch of liars, and I'm just done with politics. And so they end up being fed up with it. Say, well, I got all excited about it, and then I found out they were lying to me, so I quit. So I think we have to get back to where we're telling the truth. And I mean, like, as you know, we had I like my war analogies, but there was 14-year-old boys who lied about their age to go to war. And so I think anybody that's 14 years or older are perfectly capable of being told the truth about what a terrible predicament we're in with respect to debt. They certainly deserve to be told the truth about CO2 and the vaccines. Are, I guess maybe the jury's out. I don't think the jury's out on these vaccines. I mean, the excess deaths just seems to be, excess deaths are just horrifying to me, quite frankly, because the excess deaths, as you know, are coming in the 20 to 45 range. Like, there's no excess deaths in the people over 85. They're just dying at the rate they always did. But the excess deaths are all in the 40 to 60 range, which is where my kids are, and it horrifies me. And again, I tweeted about this morning. If adults want to take the vaccine, good for you. It's a free world. It's just like smoking and drinking and all the other things we do to shorten our lifestyle, eating too much, you name it. But to me, I think the fact that they're giving these basically untested vaccines, where their stories are getting worse all the time, the fact that they're giving it to our under 18 kids, as far as I'm concerned, it's a crime against humanity. You know what I mean? And like, to me, this needs to be stopped. And I mean, and I think, and to move on a little bit, I'm part of a group. I think you might have been to a couple of the meetings too. Art Hanger and Eric Lowther have a group. It's called the Network of Networks, and they've got about 116 networks that are working together. But I think one of the things that we all need to have a real heart to heart about is, like, focusing on a few issues and say, okay, let's just pause these. Like there's virtually no one under 18 dying of COVID, so they don't really need the vaccine. So let's just pause that till we've had 10 years of studies on the vaccine. And you mentioned earlier about the left and how all these different groups were sort of if you want to call it, arguing amongst themselves. And I don't know if you can see this, but one of my favorite books, it's called A Team of Rivals. It's written by Doris Kearns. It was about Abraham Lincoln. And one of the things that he did when he won, like, he reached out to the other three people that he had ran against in the Republican nomination, and he asked them to be in his cabinet. And the one guy said, oh, you're probably just asking me to be polite, and you're hoping that I'll just go away and let you do your business. And he said, no, that's not true. He said, the reason I'm asking you is, I honestly don't believe that I have the ability to run this country by myself. And and that's, I think that's where all us conservatives need to take a lesson from Abraham Lincoln, where we say, I don't think any one of us have the ability to run this country by ourselves, but collectively, I think we could. And the left all stick together because, generally speaking, they're predominantly it's the union movement. They're pretty much, we think our MLAs are sort of forced to toe the line. The union movement is really forced to toe the line, and quite frankly, a lot of them are working for government. They're getting a government paycheck. They got paid when they were at home. None of them went out of business, when COVID was down, when the lockdowns were on. So we're a little different group of people. But having said that, if the conservative movement would, and I've been saying this in a lot of these groups that we're going to say, look, if they're doing something you like, promote it. But if they're defending freedom and you don't quite like how they're defending it, just keep quiet. Like, you don't have to go and help them. You don't have to go to their rally. You don't have to donate money to them, but just don't criticize them. Like, if they're generally speaking trying to defend freedom, like, let's all work together. But we end up, I see the problem with conservatives is we all consider ourselves very principled people, but we all have a different number one principle that we're prepared to quit working with everybody over. And so I say, let's just soften that a little bit. Let's look at, say, look, we want, like, I mean, we've got a real challenge here, like we haven't seen, I don't think, in a long while. So let's just be a little more tolerant with each other. Let's try to work together. And even the other groups, like Paul Heyman had a meeting with 4 or 5 of the groups, 2 or 3 years before the last election. He said, let's just everybody go out and, like, everybody go and have your meetings, talk about your party, talk about what you're going to do, talk about how an independent or a sovereign Alberta, could treat the people better, and then let the people decide. It'll all sort itself out, like, as we get closer to election each time. But just don't be criticizing. If you want to criticize somebody, criticize Justin Trudeau for wanting to shut down our oil industry. Like, don't bother criticizing, the neighboring conservative because he's, you don't quite agree with him on whatever issue. So I think we could all take a lesson from, it's called A Team of Rivals. Everybody should read it. Of course, I've got a whole list of books that I haven't had time to read myself, but there's something to be said. Our conservative movement, we're sort of rivals, but we have to remember we have a common enemy, and it's the left, and it's evil. Some of it is. And I always say we're all fighting the same war, but we can't all be at every battle together. So if your friend's fighting a battle you're not necessarily all excited about, just let him fight it by himself. But remember, we're fighting the same war.
Yeah, and I think, inside of that, I think democracy's kind of been washed in that, when we have a two-party system, we have, an official government, and then we have an opposition party. And what we see right now is the coalition through the Liberals and the federal NDPs is that illusion of democracy has even been further tarnished. So, where the Liberals and the NDPs are supposedly getting along in this, the NDPs have accomplished absolutely zero through their supply and confidence deal. Their pharmacare was a joke. Their dental programs, they're a joke. The amount of people that are going to actually benefit from these things are close to zero. And what we see right now is that the Liberal Party is now starting to move towards supporting the union to try and get some of their backing. And then what we'd seen just last night is that the NDP had moved over to supporting the Muslims to try and take them away from the Liberal votes on things, right? So they're pandering to these smaller communities that have some voting power, that have some finances, and it's all together to still come to a union against what Canada has actually stood up and voiced their opinion on, that we don't want any part of it. Having the ability to opt in and opt out of these programs. Yeah, no, we're not going to give money to DEI programs in the Philippines or the Caribbean, or we're not going to pay to fight climate change in the tropics because it's stupid. But that illusion of democracy, as like I said, I think it's slipping. So, I mean, on that, and I'd had a discussion earlier with Corey Morgan on this. So Rachel Notley has stepped down from the NDP party, and not a lot of people realize that the provincial NDP is the same as the federal NDP. Now, I think where this is really important is, when we look at Manitoba, they've just elected Premier Wab Kinew as part of the NDP. Now, in January, Wab came out and he spoke up against the carbon tax increase, and he said, Manitoba's done a really good job, and we put some investment in place, and we think that we should be exempt, from the hike. But then Trudeau paid him a visit, and lo and behold, he's not one of the 7 premiers that has signed on with the, axe the tax, or, spike the hike, or whatever the nomenclature they're using is now. So, I mean, you can kind of see that happening, that, whatever he was offered, it was either for the province, or it was towards one of his other goals, but he's basically turned his back on Manitobans. And when we look at what's happening on the, the city side of things, we've got Gondek, who's accepted $132 million for this, these building programs from the federal government, but they're inside of, mandates that they've basically looped out of, what might be, in the best interest of Albertans. And if we look at, when Notley was in place, she did the same thing by killing off coal, because, that was in favor of, what Justin wanted to do. So when we see this, and especially with the, the new leadership being elected, and I mean, there's some conversations about who's going in there, Gil McGowan, or Sarah Hoffman, or Naheed Nenshi, a couple of the others. I'm not familiar with all the names. What do you think we're looking at? Like, do you think that there's actually going to be more support for the provincial NDP party under one of those other leaders, or do you think it's going to go less because Canadians are realizing that the NDP are just supporting the feds and giving away our provincial our provincial rights, continue to we lose our provincial identity. We're not able to manage our own resources. Do you think that the federal NDP, or the federal coalition, NDP Liberal coalition, is going to have some impact on the provincial NDP party? And do you think that that's going to be helped or hurt by any one of the candidates that's standing up?
I don't know. I must admit, I look at Rachel Notley's time in power, and I just think, if Albertans really want that, who was our premier, said, if you haven't suffered enough, you've got a God-given right to suffer some more. And I mean, surely Albertans have learned their lesson from the last time they were there. I mean, to me, the Liberals and the NDP are one and the same in the East. And I mean, I don't think there's any question that the NDP in Alberta have to take their lead from their Eastern bosses. And I just look at it and I think, okay, if that's what you want, so be it. You know what I mean? And one of the things that I mean, if they want to elect another NDP government, it'll be elected in Edmonton, and it'll be elected in Calgary. And one of the things we're talking about, federally, is collecting the money in Alberta and forwarding on, what we think the rest of the country needs, to pay our share. Well, I guess rather than worrying about whether the NDP are going to get elected or not, I think what we should do is we should look at even in Alberta, collecting the money locally, even maybe county by county. You know what I mean? And then when you look at the last I looked at, there was, I think, $10 billion in royalties from oil. You know what I mean? Maybe heavy oil, but I think 5 or 6 billion of it came from Fort McMurray, and $1 billion or 2 billion of it came from out of this Lloydminster Coal Lake area. And so I guess what I would say is, if the cities want to elect another NDP government, well, then I would try and figure out a way to collect the money locally. You know what I mean? And then we would pass on from Vermilion Coal Lake or Lloydminster Coal Lake. We would pass on to Edmonton what we thought was necessary. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So being separate communities inside of the province, so sovereign
communities. Like, I mean, if they're really, because I mean, if they get elected, it's going to be, Victor Davis Hanson talks about this quite a bit in the States, and he said there's a growing divide in the free world between the producers of wealth and consumers of wealth. And whether at the risk of maybe offending someone, I mean, and there's a lot of good producers of wealth in our healthcare system, the nurses and the doctors and one thing and another, but there's an awful lot of bureaucrats who aren't actually producing any wealth. And so when you look at it, like a lot of these people that are voting NDP are actually consumers of wealth. And I mean, at some point in time, the producers of wealth are going to have to say enough's enough. Like, we don't mind producing, but we'll keep it in our own area, and we'll forward to you what we think we need. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so that would be, I mean, there's some challenges to making that happen, but I think it's something that we should put on the table, and we should say, okay, let's do this. And I think there's 30 some ridings in Alberta where you can divide the conservative vote in half and not get the NDP. And so I mean, our hope is to do a good enough job of saying, look, let's have 5 or 10 or 15 wild rose people, and then let's just say we have 35 or 40 UC peers. Well, then we could work together, but there would be someone out to the right of Premier Smith saying, no, we don't want you agreeing to some of these things. And then they would be forced to take a look at some of this, how we share the taxes, one thing another. You know what I mean? So we're heading into difficult times. And I mean, if Albertans decide to vote for the NDP, maybe we're just looking at, maybe it's the decline of Alberta. I mean, who knows? I don't see us, I mean, I don't see things getting better under an NDP government. Like I say, I think we still have the potential to be an island of sanity and freedom and prosperity. But on the other hand, ordinary people like the producers of wealth need to wake up and realize who's on their side in government and who isn't.
Yeah, and that's where they say that, big business is owned by conservatives, or conservatives are owned by big business. Well, you have to respect and appreciate the people that do support your communities. The attack on Loblaws over 3% for what they're gaining, when you see the increases of what we're going to be paying for carbon tax, it does absolutely nothing, versus a multi-billion-dollar company that has to hire and employ and purchase goods and keep them on shelves and keep their stores open and adjust to the fluctuations in energy costs and deal with the weather conditions and theft and the rest of it. When you look at what Loblaws does for 3%, and you look at what the government takes, well, they do nothing and offer nothing with the money that they take, like the carbon tax. You think, who's really going to battle for who here? I'm definitely not getting behind Galen Weston or any other big business for that matter. But at the same time, I mean, you can't discount what they do inside of the communities. I'm not a big fan of Tim Hortons. I've never liked any of the products that they've had. I feel trapped in an airport if that's my only option. But at the same time, I do know that they do sponsor inside of some communities, with their programs. The same with Canadian Tire. You don't have to like all of it, but you do have to appreciate, the good that they are trying to do and that they are lending back to the communities. And it is still big business, right?
Well, it is, and I think, like, I mean, it's pretty easy to make big business the fall guy. Like, I mean, I wouldn't want to run my business for 3% profit. You know what I mean? I mean, like, who could? Like, I mean, I wouldn't, my phone wouldn't be working. You know what I mean? And so I think they're just the fall guy for the left again. Like, I mean, the big problem is not big business, and it certainly isn't Galen Weston or the Home Depots or any of these outfits, even Tim Hortons. I mean, at one point, I wasn't going to Tim Hortons either over, I think they were boycotting pipelines or something. And my 3-year-old grandson asked if we could get Timbits, and I said, no, we're not going to Tim Hortons anymore because they don't support the oil industry, and your dad works in the oil industry. And the 3-year-old said, I don't think the new Tim Hortons thinks that. And so, like, I mean, let's cut them all a little bit of slack. Again, they're like, Tim Hortons has that youth program. They have a lot of things. I don't think they're any worse than a lot of. I mean, I've had my days when I was boycotting and days when I wasn't. depends whether I needed coffee or not. And but in any event, like let's remember to me, the people that are in a business and they're writing somebody a check with their own money at the end of the day, they're generally speaking on our side. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, as much as we can, I think we need to support them, and we need to remember that, the problem we have is with the 40 or 45% of the money that we take in that goes to the federal government, and they look at us, generally speaking, with contempt. You know what I mean? And so let's look at, if we need an extra 20% in the economy, let's take it out of what we give the government and let's share it around with businesses and communities and roads and one thing and another. You know what I mean? So this goes back to the team of rivals. The businesses, we're all sort of competing with each other for the consumer dollar. But at the end of the day, we'd all be a lot better off if the government wasn't taking 40 or 50% of what we did produce. So yeah, it's a long and winding road, isn't it?
It is. Danny, we're coming up on about an hour here. So not so that I'm keeping you too long here. What do you think the biggest challenge is that that Canadians are facing right now? And what do you think the best actions are in keeping ourselves guarded and protected from that?
Well, I mean, it seems to me our biggest challenge is like the cost of government. Like, I mean, my understanding is that Justin has increased the size of the federal bureaucracy by 40% since he came in like 7 or 8 years ago. And they're pretty much, their whole focus is on, promoting all these, everything from DEI to, climate change, sequestering carbon, all this. So they're basically, 40% of our money goes to a federal government, or 40% goes to a government, and the federal government is, at least in Alberta, is hell bent on shutting down, like not only the oil industry, but agriculture. You know what I mean? And so, like, to me, again, this is just flat out evil. And I mean, on Twitter, as you know, I put agriculture, if you eat, you're involved. And I mean, it's the same thing. The oil industry, if you eat, you're involved. And so, to me, people who eat are going to have to wake up if they want to keep eating. I mean, I realize, a lot of people, myself included, are a few pounds overweight, but I don't want to stop eating. And I don't think most people do either. So I think the biggest challenge is to, the producers of wealth are being, they're being asked to feed a hungry country, with high quality food, provide them with energy on demand. And they're being forced to do that with one hand tied behind their back. And it's the same thing with some of these big oil companies. I mean, I think the little people that are sort of below the radar, they need to speak up and vote some of these elected people out that are picking on the industry, picking on agriculture. Because the big oil companies, I mean, if they get too out of step with the government, I mean, the government can put them out of business. You know what I mean? And so they have an obligation. It's not up to them. This goes back to my BlackRock story. It's not up to them to, fight all these social woes that we're having. They have investors. Their investors want them to make money getting, oil out of the ground and selling it to into the market. So I mean, those of us who are, if you want to call it middle America or the working class, it's us. I mean, they'll be around. I mean, somebody will be hiring them to get the oil out of the ground, even if we have a communist country, but life won't be so good for us. And so I think the biggest challenge is getting ordinary people to realize that we're like, our way of life is under attack. And I think more and more people need to, and I've been saying, like, if you want to continue to live as well as you have been living, being involved in the political process needs to be a line item in your time budget, and it needs to be a line item in your financial budget. Because, I mean, you look at Bill Tufts does a pretty good job of pointing, I think there's 3 million public sector union people, and they pay about $1,000 for easy figuring. It's $3 billion they have to, lobby government for all good things for unions, not necessarily for the rest of us. And you get, our Wild Rose Party, like, we're having a bake sale to try and raise enough money to fight back against that. So they've got $3 billion and we're having a bake sale. So, I mean, if people want to continue to be free, they either need to learn how to bake a pie and sell it and send us the money, or just if they can't bake a pie, they should just send some money and say, look, I want to help. And I always say some people have time, some people have money, and some people can find the time to help. And some people say, I'm too busy, but we can help you by this way. You know what I mean? So that's the biggest challenge. And like I say, or it's not going to be, I don't think we can expect the big companies or any one politician to save us. Like if we want to be saved, who was that said, like, there's nobody coming to save us. If you want to be saved, you'll have to save yourself. And so let's all work together and like I said earlier, let's remember anybody who's trying to, generally speaking, get the size of government down, they're on our side. And if they're saying something that we like, let's support it. And if you're not that keen on how they're messaging today, just leave it be. Like let them fight their battle there and you go find another battle to fight. But remember, they're generally on your side and you're not going to win without them.
That's great. Hey, Danny, I want to thank you a lot for taking some time with me today. I hope that your voice is reaching out to a lot of people, and I hope it encourages a lot of other people to just come out and have one of these conversations. Because, while I agree with everything that you've said, I don't think there's anything that I could disagree with. If there is anybody that does disagree with it, or if anybody wants to add on to it, I hope that gives them the courage to, see what you've gone through since 1971 when you started down this road, into you're still ready to stand up and like you said, with the two line items, whether it's in your budget or whether it's in your time budget, is to make this a bigger idea, because we are under attack right now.
We really are. And I appreciate the work you're doing, because this is everybody reaches a few people, and it's just, was it Warren Buffett said $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. So, if we get 1,000 followers here and 1,000 followers there, pretty soon we are reaching a lot of people, and that's what we need to do. So good luck with what you're doing. Like, call me anytime. As you know, I'm always happy to talk and share a room if necessary. Okay.
Sounds great.